You think getting fired in front of 300 employees about to pop champagne is the ultimate humiliation? I thought so too for about 10 seconds. That arrogant CEO thought he just cleared the path to pocket $400 million. But the contract he sold was an empty shell. They threw me out, but I took the soul of the project with me. Listen to how I turned my ruin into their absolute death sentence. Welcome to Boss Revenge Stories, and I sincerely thank every single one of you for tuning in today. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep our operations running. If you find today's narrative compelling, please support us by joining our Patreon to hear exclusive, true stories that are even better, significantly longer, and feature highly detailed situations with multiple emotional voice actors that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can join by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the description or the pinned comment of this video. Now, let us begin the story for today, where you will walk in my shoes, and my name is Zoe Crawford. The air conditioning inside the main atrium of the Neuropulse Dynamics headquarters in Austin, Texas, was blasting at a near-freezing temperature, but the energy in the room was boiling over. We were the absolute golden child of the biotech sector, a company built on a single, revolutionary idea involving artificial intelligence and health tracking implants. 300 employees were packed shoulder to shoulder in the massive glass-walled space, vibrating with the kind of electric anticipation that only comes when massive amounts of money are about to change hands. At the center of it all stood our Chief Executive Officer, Vance Sterling. Vance was the textbook definition of a venture capital golden boy. He wore a sharply tailored charcoal suit jacket over a crisp white shirt, pointedly lacking a tie to maintain that carefully curated image of a modern, disruptive visionary. He paced the low stage with the swagger of a conqueror, soaking in the adulation. Behind him, a gigantic digital screen illuminated the room. Vance raised his hands, demanding silence, though his smug smile showed he was relishing every second of the suspense. Today, we do not just celebrate a milestone. Vance projected his voice, dripping with rehearsed charisma. Today, we celebrate the validation of our vision. I am thrilled to announce that Neuropulse Dynamics has been officially acquired by the Apex Meridian conglomerate for $400 million. The room erupted. Virtual confetti exploded in brilliant colors across the massive screen, raining down in a digital celebration. People were cheering, hugging, calculating their stock options in their heads. I stood near the front, offering a tight, professional smile. I was the chief architect, the artificial intelligence algorithms that made those implants work, the very foundation that Apex Meridian was paying hundreds of millions of dollars for, had been born from my brain, coded by my fingers, and nurtured through countless sleepless nights. I felt a profound sense of pride, believing my relentless hard work was finally cementing my place in the industry. Then, the virtual confetti vanished from the screen. It was abruptly replaced by a stark, minimalist slide titled Corporate Restructuring. The cheering died down, replaced by a confused murmur. Vance did not miss a beat. His warm, inspiring tone vanished, instantly replaced by a cold, surgical detachment. To optimize the structure post-merger, Vance announced, his eyes scanning the crowd but deliberately avoiding mine. The chief architect position of Zoe Crawford will be eliminated immediately. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. 300 people stopped breathing all at once. The jubilant atmosphere shattered into a dead, terrified quiet. I could feel the collective shock rippling through the room, yet not a single person dared to turn their head to look at me. It was as if I had suddenly contracted a lethal, highly contagious disease. In the cutthroat reality of modern corporate culture, proximity to the condemned was dangerous. No one wanted to be associated with the execution. Before the final syllable of my name even finished echoing off the glass walls, I felt a shadow fall over me. 2 large men in dark suits, corporate security, had materialized on my left and my right. They moved with silent, practiced efficiency, I reached for the edge of a nearby desk to steady myself, but before I could even fully stand up, my phone vibrated intensely in my pocket. I pulled it out instinctively. The company application on my screen flashed a bright red notification. My employee badge had been remotely deactivated. My access to the servers, my emails, my life's work over the past 4 years, completely revoked in a fraction of a second. They did not even give me the dignity of walking back to my desk to pack my things. The guards gestured toward the exit. As I was marched down the center aisle like a disgraced prisoner, Vance was already moving on. He picked up a crystal flute of champagne from a nearby tray and raised it high. "And now, please join me in welcoming our new Chief Technology Officer," Vance declared, beaming as a tall, aggressively tanned man jogged up onto the stage. It was his fraternity brother from their college days, a man whose entire technical background consisted of managing a failed cryptocurrency startup, a man who had never written a single line of code for the Neuropulse project. The frat boy took the microphone, laughing, soaking up the scattered, hesitant applause from a terrified workforce. He was taking the credit, the money, and the title that I had built from the ground up. The heavy glass doors slid open, and I stepped out into the blazing, unforgiving heat of the Texas afternoon sun. The guards stopped at the threshold, watching me walk down the concrete steps. I stood on the pavement, feeling the scorching heat radiating through the soles of my shoes. There were no tears. My eyes were perfectly dry. The initial shock had immediately calcified into a chilling, absolute clarity. I reached into my bag, pulled out my personal phone, and opened a secure, encrypted messaging application. I selected the contact for my private attorney, typed out a single, precise message, and hit send. Activate Sunset Protocol. I did not drive back to my apartment. Going home felt too much like a retreat, and I was definitely not retreating. Instead, I navigated through the labyrinth of downtown Austin traffic until I found a remarkably dingy, dimly lit coffee shop tucked away in an obscure strip mall. It was a place entirely devoid of the tech bros and venture capitalists who infested my usual spots. The bell above the door chimed a hollow, tired note as I walked in. I ordered a black coffee, paying with cash, and slid into a cracked leather booth in the furthest, darkest corner of the room. I unzipped my bag and pulled out my personal laptop. It was an old, battered machine, heavily fortified with custom encryption, standing in stark contrast to the sleek, company-issued hardware they had just confiscated from me at the office. I flipped the lid open. The screen glowed to life, illuminating the quiet corner. This unassuming, scratched device was the actual nerve center of the entire operation, not the multi-million-dollar servers back at the glass headquarters. To understand the execution of this trap, you have to understand its foundation. 4 years ago, when Neuropulse Dynamics was nothing more than a cocktail napkin pitch that Vance used to court angel investors, I recognized a fundamental truth about men like him. They view software engineers as disposable tools, mere stepping stones on their path to the cover of business magazines. I absolutely refused to be a stepping stone. So, before I wrote a single line of the core machine learning architecture, I spent a significant portion of my own life savings to establish a discrete, anonymous limited liability company registered in Delaware. I was the sole proprietor, owning 100% of the equity. Every brilliant breakthrough, every proprietary algorithm, and every single core patent that made those health tracking implants revolutionary was legally registered under my shell company, not under Neuropulse. When Vance formally hired me as the chief architect, I handed over a massive stack of employment documents, non-disclosure agreements, and intellectual property assignments to HR. Buried deep within those thousands of pages of dense, mind-numbing legalese was a master licensing agreement. It was a masterpiece of legal misdirection. It explicitly stated that my shell company was only leasing the exclusive rights to the software to Neuropulse for a fixed term. It was a rental agreement, not a bill of sale. Vance possessed a legal team that charged $800 an hour, but they were lazy, complacent, and overly reliant on standard corporate templates. They skimmed the executive summaries, saw my signature on the dotted lines, and rubber-stamped the entire package without ever realizing they were holding a ticking time bomb. They completely missed the most critical clause hidden in subsection 42, paragraph C. That specific clause clearly stipulated that if Neuropulse unilaterally terminated my employment without cause, the software license would immediately and irrevocably default, reverting all usage rights back to the licensor. That was exactly what my text message meant. The Sunset Protocol, my private lawyer, a vicious corporate litigator I kept on a hefty retainer for precisely this scenario, had received the command. Right at this very moment, he was finalizing the cease and desist orders, preparing to digitally drop them onto the desks of both Neuropulse and their new corporate overlords at Apex Meridian. The entire legal foundation of their $400 million acquisition was currently dissolving into thin air. But I was not content to merely wait for the slow legal machinery to grind them down. I needed them to feel the collapse in real time. I opened a secure, heavily masked browser window and navigated to a hidden back-end portal I had hard-coded into the system architecture on day one. A prompt appeared on my screen, demanding my unique administrative credentials. The artificial intelligence algorithm stabilizing the health tracking implants was not just a static piece of code. It was a dynamic, evolving neural network, and I had designed it with a highly specific, fatal failsafe. The core operational stability was inextricably linked to my encrypted biometric security key. It was a digital heartbeat, a continuous handshake that told the system the master architect was still at the helm. My fingers flew across the keyboard, seamlessly bypassing the standard security protocols that the new, utterly incompetent Chief Technology Officer probably did not even know existed. I reached the core registry. With a single, deliberate keystroke, I executed the command to sever the link. I permanently deleted my biometric hash from the root directory. The system did not crash immediately. I had designed it to be far more insidious than a simple blackout. Without my digital signature to anchor the complex feedback loops, the artificial intelligence would slowly begin to cannibalize its own data structures. It would suffer a cascading degradation, returning erratic, nonsensical results before completely locking down to prevent catastrophic hardware failure. It was the digital equivalent of a central nervous system shutting down one vital organ at a time. I sat back against the worn leather seat. The waitress brought my black coffee. Leaving it on the table without a word, I picked up the heavy ceramic mug, feeling the comforting warmth seep into my palms, and took a slow sip. The bitter, dark roast tasted exactly like absolute victory. I picked up my smartphone one last time for the afternoon. I opened my professional networking application, the exact same platform where Vance had likely already posted a glowing, hypocritical press release about his brilliant merger strategy. I navigated to my own profile settings. With a soft, genuine smile, I changed my career status banner to a bright, cheerful green indicator, open to new opportunities. I closed the laptop and watched the afternoon shadows begin to lengthen across the cafe floor. They truly thought they had crushed me under their heel. But the storm gathering over their shining glass tower was only just beginning to form, and they had absolutely no shelter from what was coming. It took exactly 3 days for the structural integrity of the illusion to collapse entirely. I did not need to physically be inside the towering glass headquarters of Neuropulse Dynamics to know precisely what was unfolding. My encrypted telemetry monitors painted a vivid, undeniable picture of the chaos. The degradation of the artificial intelligence neural network, which had started as a microscopic tremor the moment I deleted my biometric key, finally reached critical mass. Inside the sterile, brightly lit testing laboratories on the 4th floor, the disaster struck without any preliminary warning. The prototype health tracking implants, the highly touted devices currently strapped to the arms of elite, highly paid beta testers, simultaneously flatlined. The diagnostic monitors scattered across the vast engineering bullpen locked up in unison. A stark, uncompromising red error message dominated hundreds of screens at once, reading simply, Root API access denied. I knew exactly the kind of blind panic that was currently paralyzing that room. A small army of young, incredibly overworked junior software engineers were frantically hammering at their keyboards, desperately trying to patch what they initially assumed was a routine server desynchronization. They dove deep into the complex source code, frantically searching for the broken logic loop. They pushed updates. They tried to bypass the security protocols, and they attempted to manually override the system. But every single path they took, every digital backdoor they tried to pry open, violently threw them back against a solid, impenetrable wall of military-grade encryption. My firewall was an absolute labyrinth, specifically designed with no exit. Every desperate attempt to rewrite the administrative permissions bounced back with zero response. They were completely locked out of the very product they were supposed to be managing. And right in the epicenter of that escalating digital inferno was the new chief technology officer, the fraternity brother who had usurped my throne. I could vividly imagine him standing in the middle of the freezing server room, sweating profusely right through his expensive designer shirt. His senior team leads were practically screaming that the core algorithms were evaporating into thin air, that the foundational biometric anchors were completely gone. But instead of sounding the company-wide alarm, instead of walking into the executive suite and admitting he was completely out of his depth, his cowardly survival instinct kicked into overdrive. He was absolutely terrified of looking like an incompetent fraud, just days before the official ink dried on the Apex Meridian acquisition documents. So, he made the fatal decision to cover it up. He explicitly ordered his terrified engineering team to keep their mouths shut, forcing them to slap temporary, cosmetic visual patches on the user interfaces just to hide the failing health metrics from the beta testers. He assured them he would handle it personally. He lied through his teeth, praying it was just a bizarre glitch he could secretly pay an expensive offshore freelance contractor to fix over the weekend. He chose silence, and his cowardice was exactly the catalyst I was counting on. Meanwhile, residing in a state of blissful, ignorant euphoria on the top floor, Vance Sterling was busy aggressively polishing his own ego, while his company's flagship technology was actively bricking itself floor by floor. He was sitting comfortably in his massive corner office, drafting extensive, self-congratulatory posts for his professional social media profiles. I watched his feed update in real time with a morbid sense of amusement. He posted long, rambling essays about the heavy burden of inspiring leadership, the relentless pursuit of visionary goals, and his unwavering commitment to building a billion-dollar empire. He attached heavily filtered, glossy photographs of himself staring thoughtfully out of his penthouse window toward the horizon. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it all was absolutely poetic. He was proudly arranging the deck chairs on a sinking ship, demanding thunderous applause from his followers, while the hull was actively splitting open directly beneath his expensive leather shoes. It was the perfect moment to accelerate the timeline and burn his vanity to the ground. I opened a completely untraceable, heavily encrypted email client, routing my connection through a dozen secure proxy servers scattered across the globe. I bypassed the lower-level analysts and addressed the message directly to the senior executive board of directors at the Apex Meridian conglomerate. The subject line remained entirely blank. The body of the email contained absolutely no text, no demands, and no amateurish threats. I simply attached a heavily redacted, undeniably authentic packet of the raw error logs pulled straight from the NeuroPulse core servers, perfectly documenting the cascading, unrecoverable system failure. More importantly, I included a flawless digital copy of the source code copyright registration alongside the exact cryptographic error string. This combination provided irrefutable proof that NeuroPulse Dynamics did not legally or technically own the core artificial intelligence they were attempting to sell. I took a deep breath, savored the silence of my living room, and hit send. The reaction from the corporate giant was not just swift, it was instantaneous, aggressive, and absolutely devastating. Apex Meridian was a ruthless, multi-billion-dollar predator that absolutely did not play games with intellectual property rights. Within 2 hours of that anonymous email landing in their secure executive inboxes, their formidable legal representatives mobilized like a tactical strike team. They violently slammed the brakes on the entire acquisition process. The massive financial transaction, the one that was supposed to seamlessly wire $400 million into the corporate accounts, was frozen absolutely solid. The escrow accounts were immediately locked down. Vance received a formal, aggressively worded legal notice directly from the Apex Meridian General Counsel. The tone of the document was entirely devoid of any of the previous celebratory warmth. It was a cold, hard, merciless ultimatum. They demanded an immediate, comprehensive emergency briefing regarding the catastrophic ownership discrepancies within the software architecture. The message delivered was crystal clear and left no room for negotiation. Neuropulse Dynamics had exactly 24 hours to definitively prove they actually owned the underlying technology, or the entire acquisition deal would be violently terminated, and the catastrophic lawsuits for corporate fraud would immediately begin. The fuse had been lit. The countdown had officially started, and the clock was ticking relentlessly towards zero. The incoming call on my encrypted personal line did not display the frantic, desperate contact information of Vance Sterling. I had fully expected him to be the first one to break under the pressure of the impending catastrophe. But the universe clearly had a far more sophisticated and dangerous player in mind for me. The caller identification simply read, Apex Meridian Corporate Legal. I let it ring exactly 3 times to establish control before answering. My voice flat, professional, and entirely devoid of any welcoming warmth. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Beatrice, the chief legal officer for the massive conglomerate. She did not yell. She did not threaten me over the phone. She did not even ask if I was available. She simply provided an address and a precise time, stating with chilling certainty that it was in my best financial interest to be there. The address she provided belonged to a highly exclusive, invite-only private art gallery located in the absolute wealthiest district of downtown Austin. When I arrived at the designated hour, the sprawling space was entirely empty of patrons or staff. The towering walls were stark white, adorned with massive, aggressive abstract paintings in slashing reds and deep blacks that looked like they cost more than a sprawling suburban mansion. Beatrice was waiting near a jagged, twisted metal sculpture situated perfectly in the center of the main viewing room. She was a striking woman in her late 50s, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy wool suit that radiated a quiet, terrifying authority. She possessed the cold, dead eyes of an apex predator evaluating a wounded gazelle on the savannah. She did not offer a handshake or a polite greeting as I approached. She merely gestured with one manicured hand toward a sleek, minimalist glass table where a single thin leather binder rested. Ms. Crawford, Beatrice began, her voice smooth, cultured, and chillingly polite. Let us dispense with the tedious corporate pleasantries and the dramatic posturing. You have executed a highly disruptive, albeit clever, legal maneuver regarding the software licensing. I can appreciate the tactical aggression you have displayed today. However, you are entirely out of your depth in this arena. Apex Meridian is a multi-billion-dollar global entity with resources you cannot even begin to comprehend. You are a single, unemployed engineer operating out of a local coffee shop. Inside that leather binder is a standard intellectual property purchase agreement for your shell company and all associated patents. We are offering you a lump sum of $5 million. It is an incredibly generous sum for a severed employee who is currently holding up our business. I did not even bother to look down at the folder resting on the glass table. I kept my posture perfectly straight and my gaze locked entirely on her icy stare, refusing to give her an inch of dominance in the quiet room. If you refuse to sign that document right now, Beatrice continued, her tone dropping a fraction of an octave into a low, rumbling threat, we will systematically bury you. We will file devastating injunctions in every applicable state and federal jurisdiction. We will freeze your assets and tie your patents up in complex litigation for the next 2 decades. Apex Meridian maintains an annual legal budget of $50 million, strictly for the purpose of crushing minor obstacles just like you. We will drag you through depositions until you cannot afford your own rent. By the time we are finished dismantling your life, you will be completely bankrupt, professionally blacklisted, and entirely erased from the technology sector. Take the $5 million right now. Zoe, walk away quietly and enjoy an early retirement." She leaned back slightly, resting her hands on the edge of the glass table, fully expecting me to crumble under the overwhelming weight of her institutional power. This was the exact, calculated moment where 99% of the population would break, completely terrified of the bottomless legal war chest she commanded. I did not flinch. I did not blink. I did not break eye contact for a single second. Instead, I calmly reached into my designer leather tote bag and extracted a thick, heavily bound dossier of my own, sliding it precisely across the smooth glass table until it came to a rest right next to her insulting lowball contract. "I think you drastically misunderstand the geometry of this situation. Beatrice," I said, keeping my voice just as smooth, just as terrifyingly calm as hers. "While your expensive due diligence team was blindly poking around the Neuropulse servers last month trying to verify the codebase, they utilized a highly insecure, outdated network bridge to pull the data back to your own corporate mainframe. It was incredibly sloppy work for a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. I noticed the glaring vulnerability immediately, and before I scrubbed my biometric keys from the system, I decided to take a quiet, undetected tour of your internal corporate risk management files. For the very first time since I walked into the gallery, a microscopic crack appeared in Beatrice's flawless, aristocratic composure. Her sharp eyes darted quickly toward the heavy dossier I had placed on the table, a flicker of genuine uncertainty crossing her features. "What you are looking at right there," I continued, leaning forward slightly to close the physical distance between us, "is the highly classified, internal risk analysis for Apex Meridian's upcoming National Health Grid Initiative, a massive, continent-wide project backed by the federal government, projected to generate over $7 billion in guaranteed revenue over the next 5 years. It is the absolute crown jewel of your entire decade-long corporate strategy. And right there, highlighted in yellow on page 42 of your own internal audit, is the undeniable conclusion drawn by your senior engineering team. The entire infrastructure of that $7 billion initiative is entirely dependent on the specific artificial intelligence stabilization algorithm that I personally created. Without my exact patents, your National Health Grid project fails completely. The government contracts will evaporate overnight. Your stock price will absolutely plummet. And your board of directors will demand your resignation before the week is over." I paused, letting the heavy silence of the art gallery amplify the absolute devastation of my words. I watched her brilliant legal mind process the new information, the terrifying realization that I was not a minor nuisance to be swatted away with a lawsuit, but rather a foundational pillar holding up their grandest ambition, hit her like a physical blow. The threat of bankrupting me suddenly felt incredibly hollow and pointless, when I possessed the immediate power to detonate a $7 billion hole straight through the center of their balance sheet. So, we are absolutely not going to talk about buyouts today," I stated with absolute, unwavering authority, taking complete control of the room. "I am not selling my life's work to you for pennies, and I am certainly not selling it back to Vance Sterling to save his miserable skin. Here are my actual terms. I will grant Apex Meridian a direct, exclusive, and ironclad license to utilize my technology in perpetuity. We will completely bypass Neuropulse Dynamics. You do not need to buy his company, because his company currently possesses absolutely nothing of value except expensive office furniture. You get the vital software, you secure your massive government contracts, and your conglomerate saves nearly $400 million by walking away from that fraudulent, empty merger." Beatrice slowly reached out and opened my dossier, her eyes scanning the highly classified, incredibly damaging documents I had flawlessly extracted from her own supposedly secure servers. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy with the sudden, violent shift in leverage. The predator had just realized she walked into a cage with something far more dangerous. "And what exactly do you want in return for this direct license?" "Zoe," she asked, dropping the formal corporate title, quietly acknowledging the entirely new dynamic between us. "Two things," I replied, my voice turning into pure, cutting ice. "First, I require a 10% royalty on all gross revenue generated by the National Health Grid Initiative. Second, and this is entirely non-negotiable, I require absolute, unquestioned authority over the destruction of Vance Sterling. I want him completely ruined. I want him humiliated in front of the entire industry. I want to dictate the exact terms of his professional execution. And I want Apex Meridian to hand me the heavy legal weapons to do it." The tense silence returned to the gallery, but this time it was not hostile or combative. Beatrice slowly closed the dossier. She looked up at me, the intimidating aura of the predator assessing the gazelle completely vanishing into the sterile air. Instead, a slow, genuine, and deeply terrifying smile spread across her face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated professional appreciation. She recognized immediately that she was no longer dealing with a disgruntled former employee or a naive software engineer. She was looking across the glass table at a monster entirely of her own kind, a ruthless architect of corporate warfare who spoke her exact language and understood the true currency of power. "I must say," Beatrice murmured, her eyes gleaming with a dark, predatory delight as she slid her own worthless contract into the trash bin beside the table, "I am going to thoroughly enjoy doing business with you." The crushing reality of the Apex Meridian ultimatum hit Vance Sterling like a high-speed freight train. Through the discreet channels I had established, I learned exactly how his realization unfolded. He opened that aggressive legal notice expecting a minor compliance request, only to discover that his grand $400 million empire had been instantly downgraded to the resale value of his sleek office furniture. The panic within those glass walls must have been absolute. Over the next 48 hours, my personal smartphone became a digital monument to his utter, miserable desperation. I watched the screen light up with exactly 53 consecutive missed calls from his private number, followed by dozens of frantic, rambling voicemails. The arrogant venture capitalist, who could not even summon the courage to look me in the eye while firing me in front of 300 people, was now actively begging for a fraction of my attention. I did not listen to a single one of his messages. I simply let the suffocating silence tear his fragile ego to shreds. Since I absolutely refused to answer my phone, Vance decided to bring his pathetic desperation directly to my doorstep. On a humid Tuesday morning, I stepped out of the elevator into the pristine marble lobby of my apartment building and found them waiting. Vance and his newly minted, completely useless chief technology officer were pacing nervously near the security desk. The visual transformation of the two men was incredibly satisfying, a perfect portrait of dark comedy. Vance was no longer the sharply dressed, disruptive visionary from the celebration stage. His expensive charcoal suit jacket was missing. His designer shirt was wrinkled. He was sweating heavily under the soft lobby lights, and the frat boy executive beside him looked like he had not slept in 3 consecutive days. They lunged toward me the absolute second I appeared, physically blocking my path to the exit doors. Vance was clutching a thick manila envelope against his chest like it was a life preserver in a Category 5 hurricane. "Zoe, please, just stop and listen to me for 1 single minute," Vance pleaded, his voice cracking with a pathetic urgency that completely lacked his usual rehearsed, dominant charisma. He shoved the heavy envelope toward my chest. "This is a brand new, ironclad employment contract. We are bringing you back right now. I am offering you triple your original salary, a massive 7-figure signing bonus, and full executive stock options. We can fix this entire situation right here, today." I stopped walking, meticulously maintaining a safe physical distance from his erratic energy, and slowly slid my right hand into my jacket pocket. My fingers easily found my phone, navigated to the voice recording application entirely by muscle memory, and silently activated the microphone. "Fix what exactly, Vance?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly flat, projecting an aura of complete innocence. I was publicly informed that my position was eliminated to optimize the corporate structure. That was a massive, terrible misunderstanding, Vance stammered, frantically waving his free hand in the air. He was rapidly pivoting to his classic psychological manipulation, desperately trying to gaslight me into feeling a sense of misplaced guilt. You cannot just walk away and destroy your own brainchild. Zoe, think about the incredible, life-saving technology we built together. Think about the future of your colleagues. 300 innocent people are going to lose their livelihoods if you do not sign this document and restore the root access right now. Apex is freezing all of the funds. If the corporate investors find out the core patents are completely missing, the whole merger collapses, and we are all completely ruined. I stood perfectly still, letting him ramble, flawlessly capturing every single word of his desperate, legally damning confession. He was openly admitting, on a crystal-clear, time-stamped audio recording, that he was actively attempting to conceal a massive intellectual property fraud from his own financial backers just to save his failing acquisition. He was willingly handing me the exact legal ammunition I needed to bury him permanently under federal charges. The frantic executive beside him finally chimed in, his voice shaking with raw fear. "Come on, Zoe. Just log in and input the biometric keys. Do not be crazy about this. We are offering you millions of dollars." I looked down at the thick envelope trembling in Vance's sweaty grip, filled to the brim with empty promises and worthless stock certificates from a company that was already legally deceased. I did not even raise my hand to acknowledge it. I just looked directly into his bloodshot, terrified eyes, letting him see the absolute, freezing void where my professional sympathy used to reside. "You do not seem to comprehend the reality of your current situation," I said, my voice cutting through the humid lobby air like a surgical blade. "I am absolutely not looking for a job, and you no longer have a functioning company left to hire me. You sold a house you did not own, and now the landlord is here to take back the keys." Without waiting for a response, I stepped cleanly around them, walking out the heavy glass doors into the bright morning light. I left them entirely paralyzed in the center of the lobby, two defeated men clutching a contract that was worth absolutely nothing at all. The morning of the final deadline arrived with a suffocating heaviness. The 50th floor of the Apex Meridian corporate tower in downtown Austin was a fortress of glass, polished mahogany, and aggressive wealth. It was a space designed entirely to intimidate, a physical manifestation of absolute corporate power. Inside the sprawling, panoramic main boardroom, Vance Sterling and his rapidly decaying leadership team sat rigidly on one side of a massive, custom-built conference table. Through the grapevine of executive assistants, I knew exactly what they looked like before I even arrived. They were running on fumes, sustained only by toxic levels of caffeine and the microscopic, pathetic hope that the Apex Meridian Board of Directors might show them a shred of unearned mercy. Vance was frantically adjusting his expensive watch, his eyes darting nervously toward the empty seats across the room. He genuinely believed he was about to engage in a tense but survivable renegotiation. He thought he could charm his way out of the abyss, perhaps offer a massive discount on the acquisition price, or sacrifice a few of his own board members to appease the angry giant. He was absolutely wrong. There was no negotiation waiting for him. There was only an execution. Precisely at 10 o'clock in the morning, the heavy, soundproof double doors of the boardroom swung open. The room fell into an immediate, deathly silence. Vance practically leaped out of his custom leather chair, expecting to see a grim team of corporate auditors or aggressive litigators. Instead, his bloodshot eyes locked directly onto me. I walked into the room, but I did not walk alone, and I certainly did not walk toward the defensive side of the table where his terrified executives were huddled. I walked shoulder to shoulder with Beatrice, the chief legal officer of Apex Meridian. I was dressed in a razor-sharp, tailored black suit that cost more than my entire first-year salary at Neuropulse. We moved in perfect synchronization, projecting an aura of absolute, uncontested authority. We bypassed the guest seating entirely and took our designated places on the side of the table strictly reserved for the Apex Meridian ownership group. The cognitive dissonance hitting Vance was almost a physical force. I watched his brain violently short-circuit as he tried to process the impossible visual information in front of him. His former chief architect, the woman he had publicly humiliated and discarded just weeks prior, was now sitting directly across from him, flanked by the most dangerous corporate lawyers in the entire state of Texas. "What is the meaning of this?" Vance stammered, his voice weak and completely devoid of its signature arrogance. He looked frantically at Beatrice, then back to me. "Why is she sitting on that side of the table? We are here to discuss the technical discrepancies and restructure the financial terms." Beatrice did not say a single word. She simply sat back in her chair, folded her hands perfectly on the table, and turned her head slightly to look at me, silently handing over complete control of the room. It was my stage now. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the cool, polished wood of the table. I stared directly into Vance's terrified eyes, letting the crushing weight of reality finally fall upon him. "There will be no financial restructuring today, Vance," I stated, my voice echoing clearly and coldly across the massive room. "You are completely out of leverage, and you are entirely out of time. You came here hoping to beg for a reduced buyout, hoping Apex would throw you a lifeline to salvage your reputation. But you failed to realize that your company no longer possesses anything that Apex Meridian wants. I did not just revoke the software licensing from Neuropulse Dynamics. That was merely the first step of the protocol." I paused, letting the silence stretch, forcing him to hang on my every word. "As of 8 o'clock yesterday evening," I continued, delivering the final, catastrophic blow, "I officially signed a comprehensive partnership agreement directly with the Apex Meridian Board of Directors. We have completely bypassed your hollow shell of a company. I have granted them exclusive, permanent rights to the core artificial intelligence patents. Furthermore, we have officially established a brand new, fully funded subsidiary dedicated to managing the National Health Grid Initiative. And I am sitting on this side of the table, Vance, because I am the chief executive officer of that new subsidiary." The color completely drained from Vance's face. He physically swayed in his chair, his jaw dropping open as the sheer magnitude of the absolute defeat washed over him. He had not just lost the $400 million deal, he had lost the entire industry. He was obsolete. Sensing the kill was complete, Beatrice seamlessly took over the final legal mechanics. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of aggressively stamped legal documents, dropping them onto the center of the table with a loud, definitive thud. "This first document," Beatrice announced, her voice dripping with lethal corporate formality, "is the official, immediate termination of the acquisition merger between Apex Meridian and Neuropulse Dynamics. Your company is currently worth less than the paper this is printed on. The second document, however, is far more pressing for your immediate future, Mr. Sterling." She slid a separate, highly detailed folder directly across the wood until it hit Vance's trembling hands. "That is a formal civil lawsuit," Beatrice explained, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. "Apex Meridian is suing you personally, along with your venture capital backers, for gross misrepresentation, massive corporate fraud, and the intentional concealment of critical intellectual property ownership prior to a major financial transaction. And before you attempt to claim ignorance or blame your incompetent legal team, you should know that we have already submitted a pristine, crystal-clear audio recording directly to the federal authorities, a recording where you explicitly and desperately admit to hiding the missing software rights from your own investors." The mention of the audio recording was the final nail in the coffin. The frat boy chief technology officer, who had been sitting frozen next to Vance, suddenly realized the massive criminal liability he was now attached to, without saying a single word. The newly minted executive stood up, his face pale with raw terror. He did not look at Vance. He did not look at me. He simply turned around and practically sprinted out of the boardroom, abandoning his best friend to face the devastating consequences entirely alone. Vance did not even try to stop him. He sat there, utterly broken and completely alone, staring blankly at the lawsuit that guaranteed his impending prison sentence and the absolute financial ruin of the venture capital fund that had blindly supported his massive ego. He had tried to play God with my life, and I had systematically dismantled his entire universe without ever needing to raise my voice. Beatrice and her legal team began gathering their briefcases. The meeting officially concluded. I stood up slowly, feeling a profound, absolute sense of calm wash over my entire body. I walked away from the table and stepped over to the massive, floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the sprawling city of Austin. The Texas sun was shining brilliantly on the skyline. A silent assistant stepped out of the shadows, offering a silver tray, holding 2 crystal flutes of exceptionally rare, incredibly expensive champagne. I picked one up, feeling the cool crystal against my fingers. This time, the celebration was not an illusion. This time, the victory was completely real, built on my own undeniable brilliance and absolute ruthlessness. I raised the glass slightly to the bustling city below, taking a slow, deeply satisfying sip. I had taken their greatest weapon, turned it completely inside out, and used it to conquer the empire they tried to steal from me. Thank you so incredibly much for listening to this story today. I would absolutely love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop your city or country in the comments below. If you found today's narrative completely satisfying and want to support the channel, please help us out by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon. You will get access to the absolute best, highly exclusive true stories that are far too intense and detailed to ever be made public on YouTube. You can join right now by scanning the QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the direct Patreon link located in the video description or the pinned comment. Thank you again, and stay ruthless out there.